Now, again, as I mentioned, we get asked this question a lot, and there's a lot of interest in how. But there's got to be a way to get this really, this really valuable tool for development, the 360 process, to support or augment or replace. Or there's got to be a way to blend these two things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present a couple of examples. I've got it's actually the same client that's done two different ways of getting their 360 to support the performance management process and serve some of the needs that the performance management process is targeted at. So a way that works extremely well, in effect, to address this issue. So the first thing is around getting better at providing performance feedback. So how do you use a 360 review to address this gap that we saw in the performance management process? So again, I'm going to present two. The first one is going to really address this issue here. So the first approach of the two is, again, helping people prioritize their development. So we know that people feel like when they get their performance review, it's not useful for prioritizing their development, doesn't tell them how they're improving. So how can we use the 360 to help them do that better? Again, the idea of giving them actionable feedback, adding in more perspectives is more valuable than just that one manager, that one boss, luck of the draw. And then also the importance here of having an independent feedback coach that can really help them put it in context to understand, well, what is the better priority here and where should I be focused? So that's going to be the first case. And then the second case I'm going to talk about is a way to use the 360 process to fit with what people are currently doing in their performance review to make that better. So kind of two different approaches to how to use the 360 process to level it up. All right. So again, when we think about the prioritizing, in this particular case, what we were tasked with was to say, okay, we really want to make sure that the development goals and the improvement, the things that we identify for people that they improve, they feel really good about. So we built a process and timed it and structured it in a whole and integrated it well with the performance management in such a way that only the employee got their own coworker feedback, and that's what was used to prioritize development. So now the CCL people are very happy here because it's just only that person getting the feedback. But then what we did was we staggered the implementation. So in July, mid-year, they're getting their 360s on what do I need to do to improve. And that helps them then toward getting those goals achieved by the end of the year. Now, by staggering, it's very clear that the two processes are separate. One is really developmentally oriented, and one is really just going to be about results, if you will. But of course, the 360 and components, as we'll see here, of the 360 find their way into the performance review. And in doing this, they were very careful to communicate the differences between the two. They were very careful to say the July 360 is not your performance review. It's intended to help you prioritize your development. But then what they did was they provided a coach that worked with each individual to figure out, in the context of what's going on in their work, context of the feedback and who was providing the raters, who the raters were that were providing the feedback, what are the key takeaways here? What are your development areas? And once they agreed upon that, the coach actually summarized and pushed that out to the manager. So the manager, the person's manager, is now involved in knowing what the development areas are, even though he or she doesn't have a copy of the report. So in this way, you're able to integrate it into the performance management because the manager can then look at it and doing the performance review and say, okay, it looks like these should be your areas of focus and development, and how are you doing on them, and let's keep you going in this direction. And so by doing this, you end up getting kind of the best of both worlds, and in the feedback and the prioritization of development that shows up in the performance review is much, much more relevant, and again addresses many of those questions around multiple sources, trusting the feedback, all that sort of thing. So this process has been very, very successful. In fact, we also do the engagement survey for this organization, and their engagement scores around this particular issue about the usefulness of their performance review for identifying development priorities is quite a bit better. So we've had some great success in doing this and just basically using the 360 for what it is best used for, but timing it right and then making sure that there's a constructive way to have it be an input into the performance management process that does not break some of the critical aspects of getting accurate feedback from a development perspective using the 360. All right, so in this example, we've sort of covered the left side of this continuum, if you will, from a development planning, self-development sort of perspective, and we've supported the right side, but we haven't really hit directly on. So Dave and company are probably like, okay, that's nice, but still, there's more you can do with those data. Isn't there a way to use the 360 to really support accurate performance management? So same client asked the same question, and so what we did was we said, well, let's take a look at what you're currently doing and what's going on in your organization. So we interviewed a bunch of managers, and what we found is, not unlike many organizations, if we want to try to address this edge of the continuum, we find that many managers were sending out, as part of that process, emails. So they would send out emails to a set of colleagues around the person they're trying to evaluate, and they would basically ask the question, hey, how'd Jane do this year? And then they would get some smattering of emails back. So maybe they send out 10 emails and they get 6 back, and they think, oh, great, I got 6 emails back. Great, how's Jane doing? And they go through and they look at those answers that are written verbatim and use that then as evidence, if you will, to put into their performance management ratings and comments. This is probably not the best possible thing, and maybe there's a way that 360 can address this. So if you think about it, what's going on here? Is there anonymity? Absolutely not. So do you have accurate ratings? Well, we know, because we know that ratings get inflated even when the purpose has changed, but when anonymity is not even there, people are going to be even more congratulatory, and so more than likely the 4 that didn't respond, if you don't have anything good to say. So there's some concern there around accuracy just because the anonymity isn't there. The other thing is different questions. So all the different managers across the organization, some are just saying, hey, how'd Jane do? And others are saying, hey, was Jane nice this year? Did Jane, they may be more specific, and they might be more specific in ways that frankly are creating some unintended bias. Maybe intended bias. Maybe this is an individual the manager's really been trying to get rid of, so they're asking specific questions that might help serve the purpose that they have for their evaluation. Maybe they're really trying to move people out, trying to get that, that answer they want. And then of course some employees have their managers doing this and some don't. So there's lots of variability and a lot of challenges, and most HR managers, when they look at this list, their kind of red flags start going up. So what we said is, well, all right, let's see if we can address this concern and leverage 360 to do it. So instead of the developmental 360 that I talked about before, what we did was we did an additional 360 process wherein only the person's manager gets the report. And that was very explicitly used to inform their development, their performance review. And it was also timed just for that. It was very clear to everybody. So in this case, though, it's only 10 questions. So it's 10 very performance-specific, not behavior, not kind of, follows through on commitments, acts with a sense of urgency, admits mistakes. These are all good things from a developmental standpoint, but not necessarily from a performance review standpoint from an achievement. So there were some real specific, and I'll give some examples on my next slide. The other thing is that we made a very transparent link. So it was very clear to all employees, the answers you're using here are going to the manager, so the manager can improve their ratings of the person. It's going to be incorporated into their performance review. And so, whereas this 360 is being done in November, immediately preceding the performance management tool, so it's very clear to everyone what the purpose is, and then lots of effort at differentiating it from the development-oriented 360. And then we spent a lot of time training the managers on how to use this and how not to use this, and really making sure that their input, it was an input and it was done properly. And again, looking at things like response rates and that sort of thing to make sure that they're really using the data well. If they get odd comments, they're being careful about how they use those or don't use those, that sort of thing. So, our sense here, and then, also the other key element is this: you're able to standardize the list of raters. You're able to say all of your direct reports are going to feed this, all of these peers, and it's easily auditable in terms of how many people have responded and who was invited. So it can be standardized across the organization who it is that's being invited. So what did it look like? I wanted to just kind of throw in a couple of key elements to give you an idea of what we really meant and how it kind of differentiated. So, for example, still a 5-point scale, and you can use this. In this case, they did, in fact, have the scale map on. So the 5-point scale was also different from the developmental 360. It was more performance management. But it was questions like, did the person, did they met deadlines or they didn't this year? Did they deliver high quality work? Did they collaborate well with you? Just a couple of key things that are going to drive directly to their results, if you will, more so than just the behavior that get their results, which was the July implementation. And then the open-ended questions were, what specific achievements did you observe? So what did they accomplish? And then where did the person fall short of expectations? So again, the tenor of it is very clearly around trying to support and improve the performance management aspect of the development aspect of performance management, but also the documentation aspect of it. So in doing this, we were able to provide two different ways of leveraging the 360 process, very different processes in terms of timing and positioning and communicating, but both very much using the methodology of 360 feedback to support some of the key gaps in performance management.